Welcome to this week's news roundup. We're going to be tweaking some things here and there, camera angles and such. So please, if you could forgive the small changes as we continue. But for now, let's get to the board game news for May 3rd, 2023. Our first story is going to be about Mythic Games. This company really focuses on making big games, usually involving lots of heavy miniatures, and they tend to be crowdfunded. Now, if you watch the news roundup regularly, you might know where this story is heading. Now, they have recently asked those who backed their campaign for Seed 6, a game based on the C6 property, which I actually got to demo and try out back at Gen Con a while ago, to give an additional contribution to help with the production. Now, this is not during the campaign. The campaign has ended a while ago. People have put in their pledges, but they're asking for more money to help make the game be made. Now, the amount they're asking for each person is different. They're basically asking for a little bit, if not more or less, around 50% of whatever your original pledge was. I don't know if they're asking more from people who threw in a bunch of add-ons, which of course there's going to be a bunch. So even for the base retail game, which was about $69, they're asking people there for about $39 to contribute. So you can only guess how much more you're going to pay if you already paid a bunch for, let's say, the all-in pledge. Obviously, a lot of people are pretty angry about this, not just because you're asking for more when we've already given you the money, but also, one, there's the wording. They said for production, not for the game to get to you. So this means that more, I was going to say could be, but let's be honest, will be asked when it comes to the shipping phase. As most of the times we've been hearing about Kickstarters asking for more money, comes during the shipping part, not even at that moment yet. Yes, shipping crates have gone down in value since the peak a little while ago, but they're still an expensive part of the campaign process. The other thing is, other Mythic campaigns haven't been, this isn't like the first hiccup they've come across. This is more of an issue, and a lot of people are worried anything that went to Seed 6 was already spent and used on something else, which is why they're asking for money for production. This, for a lot of people, is already showing signs of, we've seen with multiple companies declaring bankruptcy when it comes to crowdfunding heavy companies, which really use crowdfunding as their main way to get games into the marketplace rather than dropping a few crowdfunding projects here while also having a reasonable straight to retail kind of style games. So people are pretty much saying, I'm not going to contribute. And a lot of people, I think fairly so, are saying, I'd rather give up because this isn't a guarantee that I'm going to have to pay even more when it comes to the shipping or what else is going to happen. And some other companies have done this, but usually they offer something in addition, like, look, we need a contribution, but we'll give you an expansion, new rules, a guarantee that you get a discount next game, so on and so forth, something of that nature. But there is no incentive here, partially because I don't think Mythic can provide one. I think they're in that kind of spot, and unfortunately, I have a feeling that later on, I'm going to have another news story talking about Mythic declaring bankruptcy. Our next news story isn't maybe as much news, but something I thought was very interesting and a bit more positive, technically speaking, especially compared to the previous story, is all about the future of business and board games. Now, on the site Business Wire, I read an article stating that they predict that the market value of the board game business marketplace is going to go up to a little under $40 billion by 2028. Apparently, back in 2022, which is the last year we could really look at the full year, it was about $19 billion. So that is quite the jump. They were looking at the continued growth and popularity of games. They mentioned Wingspan and Gloomhaven, as well as they mention how there is a large growth of board gaming cafes, places where people are looking to, get some snacks and a place to play their board games. However, they did mention there are going to be hurdles, such as the general things we've already seen, the cost of getting products, the materials, the shipping, the loss of faith from consumers, see previous story. But it's still looking like an upward trend. They also mentioned some companies that seem very big. They mentioned actually 4 big ones. 2 of them you're probably not going to be shocked about, Mattel and Hasbro. But they also mentioned Asmodee, which if you're in the hobby, you're not surprised. But also Ravensburger. So it seems Ravensburger now is considered alongside those titles in terms of the large companies. They also listed a bunch of other ones, which mostly I point out because they did not list either Cephalofair or Stonemaier Games, which were the two companies that made the games they mentioned earlier in the article. Regardless, it does seem board gaming as a whole has not hit that plateau yet. Though if we look at the previous news story, I think the question more on is if we had our fill of board games, or rather we're changing how we choose to buy them. Maybe because we're seeing board games more appear in places like your big box stores, your Targets, your Walmarts, that we don't feel the need to have to use crowdfunding projects as much. And of course, with many companies that usually just focus on crowdfunding, they're usually just one bad year from having to hit hard times. So maybe we're going to start seeing, I don't know if we're going to see companies consolidate or just companies learn to play a bit safer when it comes to banking it all on a big Kickstarter or just hoping for a solid retail push. All right, so Gama happened last week, so we have a few stories coming out from there. First, overall, apparently this was a increase in attendance, beating out the last year that was unaffected by the world in 2019. Back then, it was about 1,700 people attending, but this year they had about 2,400. So a big boost in numbers there. That said, apparently they're still behind in terms of the number of stores having booths there. It's an interesting dichotomy of more people showing up versus the number of retailers showing up to show off their wares. Partially, I think this is because there's not usually as many news stories coming out of Gama. They usually wait until Gen Con to show off their wares or Essen. But with this growth, I'm wondering if we're going to start seeing more and more things being revealed at Gama. The other thing to quickly mention is it's actually moving. Next year, it's going to be in Louisville, Kentucky. So for those of you on the East Coast, and especially in Kentucky, you're going to be much closer to the convention. For those on the West Coast, however, it's going to be a bit more of some traveling. Next up, we're going to talk about Modifius. They're known usually for bringing many different already well-established properties into the RPG scene, such as Star Trek, Fallout, but they have announced a new RPG, Dreams and Machines. This is their own property in their own universe in which you, as the players, will have to be on a planet that was ravaged by these strange mech walkers, disconnected from Earth, and you're pretty much building up from the scraps of, which are still very advanced technology. All the while, there'll be an evil AI for you to plot with or whatever your DM decides to mess around with. What's interesting about this, though, is they're not just planning to make an RPG book, but they want to put into other tabletop games and even a TV show series. This is sort of funny to me because it really reminds me of the Cowboys and Aliens moment where someone wanted to make the movie Cowboys and Aliens, but it wasn't based on anything. So they literally released a comic book to show producers and studios were basing it off of this thing. So this is a bit of a chicken and egg. I wonder if they just wanted to make a TV show and then made a property to make TV show, or they're just hopeful that we're going to see a lot more media in the film industry being based on tabletop products. Pathfinder announced a new core book to be released later this year. It is Pathfinder 2nd edition still, but remastered. The idea here is it's really trying to untangle itself with the whole OGL mess we talked about early on in the year, really making sure that this is going to be its own book that if you do play Pathfinder for any form of media consumption or make products for, that you're not going to be worrying about that the D&D part in ancestry is going to mess with your plans. Now, they have a core book later slated out this year, but there will be a monster manual released later in 2024. And for those of you worried, that, like I said, this is not 3rd edition. This is still going to be compatible with everything for 2nd edition that's already out. Either way, this is going to be a good boon and probably some great sales, and perfect for someone like me who's like, maybe I should jump on that Pathfinder train. But I'm totally being rewarded for being lazy and not buying the book yet. So Stoneblade Entertainment makes some very popular games, but many might know that they partner with Ultra Pro for some of their titles. But at this Gama, they announced that they've gotten those titles back under their own umbrella and just theirs, meaning they have a lot more control over these products. They include some titles that we know and love, such as Ascension and Ascension Tactics, but also Shards of Infinity, a game that I saw a while back at a Gen Con, but didn't see much of afterwards. But now that they've gotten the rights completely to these games, they also announced they're going to be working on a new big box for Shards of Infinity titled Shards of Infinity Saga, which will include all the previous stuff as well as some new fun little mechanics. And I'm sure to be a jumping off point for even more Shards of Infinity in the future. So if that was a game you enjoyed, well, good news. It looks like it's getting its rebirth later on in a Kickstarter project. But now let's get to some game announcements first before we wrap this up. First, for those of you who were big fans of Pathfinder but want something a bit more digital, there is now a game in the works that is going to play a lot like Diablo but using Pathfinder. Pathfinder Abomination Vaults is going to be made by BKOM, which will play like Diablo as an overhead hack and slash game, but you play as the famous Pathfinder characters that are sort of the pre-made ones you may recognize on their other products. Our next game is based on another big property, and it's Hello Kitty. She'll be joining the tabletop space with Hello Kitty Walk in the Park. This game is going to be designed by Roberta Taylor, who designed games such as Creature Comforts as well as Octopus Garden. The interesting fun thing, though, is it's going to be helped with Maestro Media, who are the people who made Binding of Isaac, another popular indie video game, but definitely not one that I would think about pairing with Hello Kitty. Regardless, hopefully this will still be a fun game, and you can expect to see it, as maybe some of you guessed, on a Kickstarter page later on this year. Finally, a little while ago, I talked about Funko announcing an Indiana Jones Cryptic game. This is actually going to be a line of escape rooms based on popular media, that one being Indiana Jones. They have now also announced a Star Trek Cryptic, so you have another game and showing the line and the ideas and the properties that they're going to use for this. Obviously a cool idea. We've seen a lot of escape room games, but you see them, maybe they get a license. For example, Unlock got the Star Wars license for a few. It really seems like this cryptic line will be, each one is going to be based on a major property. And there are tons for them to choose from. And if we look at previous Funko games, some fun ones we can expect would be the Goonies. Jurassic Park would be a cool one with raptors. And knowing that will probably sell well, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Rick and Morty one later on down the line. We're escaping the Kickstarter segment for this week, so let me know your thoughts on all this. A lot of games I mentioned and announced are coming later to Kickstarter, all this being led with a story about a company that focuses on crowdfunding projects having a rough time. Let me know your thoughts if you've backed any of those projects. If you were at Gama, I'd love to hear anything you have to offer. And of course, the usual like, share, subscribe are also really helpful for the algorithm and all of that. And let me know your thoughts as I mess around with what I try to do for the News Roundup video. But for now, I'm Will, and this has been the News Roundup.